There was a time when I believed understanding was the safest place a person could live. Not happiness, not love, not certainty. Understanding. Because understanding creates distance. It lets you observe without becoming involved. It lets you explain without having to feel. It gives every emotion a structure, every decision a reason, every silence a definition. I built my life around that idea. Everything had a pattern. Every conversation carried hidden architecture. Every choice revealed a process. Every person eventually became readable. Not because they wanted to be, but because people repeat themselves more often than they realize. I learned to watch before I spoke, to notice before I reacted, to understand before I trusted. It wasn't fear. At least, that's what I told myself. It was discipline. The discipline of never allowing a single moment to become more important than the whole picture. That way, nothing could surprise me. Nothing could rearrange the structure I'd spent years building inside my own mind. Or so I believed. Then something changed, not suddenly, not dramatically. There wasn't a single conversation I can point to, no unforgettable moment, no sentence that echoed through my mind for days. If anything, it happened so quietly that I almost missed it. A small pause. A familiar feeling that shouldn't have been familiar. The strange realization that someone else's presence had become part of the background of my thinking, not constantly, just often enough that I noticed. At first, I dismissed it. The human mind is good at finding patterns, sometimes too good. We connect unrelated events. We remember coincidences more vividly than ordinary moments. We create stories because unfinished questions make us uncomfortable. I know all of that, which is exactly why I refused to trust my first impression. I questioned it, then questioned the questions. I looked for simpler explanations. Maybe I was projecting. Maybe I was paying attention in a new way. Maybe I wanted meaning where none existed. Every possibility deserved consideration, because certainty earned too quickly is rarely certainty at all. Days became weeks. Weeks became observation, and something unexpected happened. Instead of becoming clearer, my conclusions became humbler. The more I looked, the less interested I became in proving anything. Instead, I became interested in noticing. There's a difference. Probing begins with an answer. Noticing begins with curiosity. Curiosity doesn't demand conclusions. It allows reality to remain more complicated than comfort would prefer. That was unfamiliar territory for me. I'd always believed clarity meant having answers. Now it began to feel like clarity might simply mean asking better questions. Questions like, why does one conversation linger while 10 others disappear? Why do certain silences feel complete instead of empty? Why do some people make you perform a version of yourself, while others make performance feel unnecessary? I don't know if there are universal answers. Maybe there aren't. Maybe every meaningful connection is different. Maybe every person becomes a mirror for a different part of who we are. If that's true, then the most important thing another person can reveal isn't themselves. It's the version of you that only exists in their presence. That possibility stayed with me. Not because it solved anything, because it complicated everything. If another person's presence can quietly reshape the way you think, what does that actually mean? Does it mean they're changing you? Or does it mean they're revealing something that was already waiting beneath the surface? I've turned that question over more times than I can count, and every answer eventually dissolves into another question. Maybe that's the point. Maybe not every truth arrives as certainty. Maybe some truths arrive as an invitation to become more honest with yourself. Not more confident, not more romantic, just more honest. Because honesty asks something difficult. It asks whether you've mistaken control for understanding, whether you've confused distance with wisdom, whether you've spent so long observing life that you've forgotten what it feels like to actually participate in it. Those questions don't accuse me. They simply remain, papadonta, unanswered, waiting for the day I become honest enough to answer them without protecting the version of myself I've always believed to be true. I don't know when that day will come. I only know this. Something has shifted. Not the world, not reality, me. And for the first time in a very long time, I'm willing to admit that I don't yet know what that shift is trying to teach me. Maybe that's where every real transformation begins. Not with certainty, but with the quiet courage to stop pretending you already understand. The strange thing about transformation is that it almost never announces itself. It doesn't arrive with certainty. It doesn't ask to be noticed. It begins in places so quiet that at first they seem insignificant. A hesitation before speaking, a longer pause after someone leaves, the realization that an old conclusion no longer feels complete. I used to believe that change happened through dramatic moments. Now I think it happens through accumulation, one observation, then another, until one day you realize the person making your decisions isn't exactly the same person who made them a year ago. I've been noticing those changes in myself. Not because someone demanded them, not because anyone expected them, simply because awareness has a way of exposing things that routine keeps hidden. The habits I once called certainty now look more like protection. The distance I once called independence sometimes feels like caution carried longer than necessary. And the silence I once believed was strength, I'm no longer sure it always was. Silence can protect, but it can also prevent. It can preserve peace, or it can postpone honesty. For years, I never had to ask which one I was choosing. Now I do. Not because someone else expects an answer, because I do. There is an uncomfortable freedom in admitting that you've outgrown your own explanations. It means the stories you've told yourself no longer fit the person you're becoming. And replacing them isn't easy. The familiar, even when incomplete, often feels safer than the unknown. Perhaps that's why we hold on to old identities. Not because they're true, because they're familiar. But familiarity isn't the same as truth. Sometimes it only means we've repeated something often enough that it's stopped feeling like a choice. I've started wondering how many parts of myself were built that way. How many beliefs became permanent simply because I never questioned them again. How many walls became part of the landscape because I forgot they were walls. Questions like these don't offer comfort. They offer perspective. And perspective has a quiet way of changing everything. Once you see a pattern, it's difficult to pretend it isn't there. Once you recognize a habit, it becomes impossible to call it instinct. Once you notice the difference between who you are and who you've been, the distance between those two people becomes impossible to ignore. That's where I find myself now, standing somewhere between familiarity and possibility, not rushing toward either one, simply observing, because observation, when it's honest, isn't passive. It's preparation. Preparation for decisions that eventually have to be made, not dramatic decisions, not life-changing declarations, just small choices, the kind that quietly redefine an entire future. Choosing to listen instead of assuming, choosing curiosity instead of certainty, choosing presence instead of automatic distance. Those choices rarely look important in the moment. But lives aren't reshaped by single extraordinary events alone. They're reshaped by ordinary moments repeated in different ways. Maybe that's why this feels significant. Not because everything changed overnight, because something subtle keeps changing every day. My attention has become different. My questions have become different. Even the way I experience quiet has become different. Silence no longer feels like an empty room waiting to be filled. Sometimes it feels like a place where understanding grows before language can reach it. That thought would have seemed impossible to me once. I used to believe words created understanding. Now I wonder if words often arrive after understanding has already begun. Perhaps language isn't where connection starts. Perhaps it's where connection becomes visible. If that's true, then not everything meaningful can be explained immediately. Some experiences ask to be lived before they're interpreted. That idea challenges everything I once believed about certainty. Because certainty always wanted conclusions. Awareness is willing to wait. And maybe waiting isn't weakness. Maybe it's respect. Respect for complexity. Respect for another person's mystery. Respect for the possibility that reality is often deeper than our first explanation. I'm learning that not every unanswered question is a problem. Some are invitations to remain open long enough for understanding to arrive naturally, without forcing it, without controlling it, without pretending to know more than I actually do. That kind of patience doesn't come easily to me. But perhaps growth rarely does. Perhaps growth always feels like standing at the edge of a version of yourself you've already outgrown, while not yet recognizing the person you're becoming. It's uncomfortable, it's uncertain, it's honest, and maybe honesty has been the destination all along. Not certainty, not perfection, just the willingness to meet yourself without the stories that once kept everything neatly arranged. Because when those stories begin to fall away, what remains isn't emptiness, it's possibility, yet unfinished, and more real than anything certainty could have given me. There comes a moment when every question you've carried for so long begins asking something back. Not about the world, not about other people, about you. I've spent years believing that understanding meant reaching the end of uncertainty. Now I think understanding begins the moment you stop running from it, because uncertainty isn't always the absence of truth. Sometimes it's the space where truth is still becoming visible. I used to resist that idea. I wanted clear lines, clear meanings, clear endings. I wanted every experience to fit inside a definition before I allowed it to matter. It felt safer that way. If everything could be named, then nothing could surprise me. But life has never cared much for the limits we draw around it. The moments that shape us rarely arrive with labels. They arrive quietly. A conversation that stays with you long after it ends. A silence that somehow says more than explanation ever could. A realization that changes the way you look at yourself, even if nothing around you has changed at all. Those moments don't ask for permission. They simply become part of you. Looking back, I don't think what unsettled me was change itself. It was the realization that I couldn't control the pace of it. I could observe it, question it, reflect on it, but I couldn't force it to arrive faster. And I couldn't send it away simply because I wasn't ready. Some things mature in their own time. Understanding is one of them. I've stopped trying to solve every mystery the moment it appears. Not because I've given up, because I've learned that some answers only reveal themselves after you've lived with the question long enough. There is a strange kind of peace in admitting that not every meaningful experience demands an immediate conclusion. Not every connection needs a label before it has value. Not every turning point announces itself as one. Sometimes the deepest shifts happen so gradually that you only recognize them when you notice you're responding to the world differently than you once did. That's what I've begun to see. The greatest change wasn't outside of me. It was in the way I related to uncertainty itself. I no longer see it as an enemy. I see it as evidence that I'm still growing, still learning, still willing to become someone my past self couldn't fully imagine. Maybe that's all transformation has ever been, not becoming someone entirely new. Becoming more honest about who you've been all along. There is courage in that. Not the loud kind, not the kind people applaud, the quiet kind, the kind that chooses authenticity over certainty, presence over performance, curiosity over control. I've realized something else, too. The People who leave a lasting impression on us aren't always the ones who give us answers. Sometimes they're the ones whose presence encourages us to ask better questions. Questions that remain long after the conversation ends, questions that slowly reshape the way we understand ourselves. Those questions have become gifts, not because they're comfortable, because they're true, and truth doesn't always arrive as certainty. Sometimes it arrives as clarity. A calm recognition that you don't need to have every outcome mapped before taking the next honest step. That realization has changed me more than any conclusion ever could. I don't know exactly what tomorrow will bring. I don't know how every chapter unfolds. I don't know which paths will remain and which will quietly disappear with time. What I do know is this: I no longer measure the value of an experience by whether it lasts forever. I measure it by whether it helped me become more truthful, more aware, more fully present in my own life. If the answer is yes, then it mattered. Whether it stayed for a season or for a lifetime, perhaps that's the quiet lesson hidden beneath all of this. Life isn't asking us to predict every ending. It's asking us to meet each moment with enough honesty that, whatever the ending becomes, we can recognize ourselves within it. For a long time, I believed strength meant remaining unchanged. Now I think strength is something else entirely. Strength is allowing reality to teach you without surrendering your integrity. It's allowing wonder without abandoning reason. It's allowing closeness without losing yourself. It's allowing uncertainty without demanding immediate certainty. That is where I stand now, not at the end of the story, not at the beginning, but in the only place any of us ever truly live, the present moment, a place where nothing is completely finished, nothing is completely certain, and yet, everything meaningful begins. So I stopped searching for perfect answers. I stopped trying to force every experience into a definition. I stopped asking life to become simpler than it is. Instead, I choose to remain awake, to notice, to listen, to grow. Because perhaps the most important transformation isn't finding certainty about the world. It's becoming someone who can face the unknown with honesty, humility, and an open heart. And for the first time in a very long time, that feels like enough.